there is an ugly truth almost no one wants to say out loud. A lot of men are not falling out of love, they are being slowly dismantled, piece by piece. Sanity, confidence, ambition, even the basic sense of self-worth are chipped away, not by fists or screaming matches, but by something far harder to see and much easier to deny. It does not leave bruises. It leaves a man who looks fine from the outside, but inside he is empty, apologizing for existing, begging for crumbs of validation from someone who once promised love and partnership. Modern relationship culture loves to talk about toxic men, emotional labor, bare minimum behavior. What almost never gets airtime is the silent, methodical destruction of men's psyche through psychological games, emotional terrorism, and weaponized vulnerability, especially when it is done by exes who still have emotional access, shared history, or children as leverage. When a man finally drags himself out of a dysfunctional relationship, the story is rarely over. For many, that is exactly when the psychological warfare becomes more subtle and more intense. The core problem is simple but devastating. Too many men walk into relationships believing they are signing up for partnership, but they are actually signing up for a long-term project of self-erasure. They think they are building a life together. In reality, they are being trained to become a compliant resource. Provider, therapist, punching bag, emotional trash can, and crisis manager, all rolled into one. Their needs, boundaries, and standards are framed as selfish, immature, or unmanly. Over time, a man stops asking, "What do I want?" and starts asking, "What will keep her from exploding today?" From the outside, this is easy to dismiss. Friends and family see curated photos, social media posts, vacations, and nice dinners. They see a couple. They do not see the conversations where every small disagreement turns into a character assassination. They do not see how she can flip from affectionate to ice cold in seconds. They do not see how his work success is instantly reframed as not enough, because some other man somewhere bought a bigger house, a nicer ring, or a more expensive vacation. They do not see how he is punished emotionally whenever he dares to enforce a boundary. The real brutality of this dynamic is its plausibility. None of it looks extreme in isolation. A snide remark here, a guilt trip there, a bit of stonewalling, a few jokes that cut deep. Some tears at strategic moments. A few subtle threats about leaving or taking the kids. Each moment seems small, maybe even defensible if you squint hard enough. But over years, the accumulation turns into a methodical demolition of a man's inner world. This is psychological warfare, disguised as normal relationship drama. For modern men, the pain point is not just heartbreak, it is the realization that they were never seen as a full human being to begin with. They were seen as a role, as a service, as a solution to someone else's feelings of inadequacy, boredom, status, anxiety, or entitlement. Once that role is not performed perfectly, once he asks for reciprocity, or once he leaves, the ex does not simply let go. She often escalates. Now the game becomes about control without commitment, access without responsibility, attention without accountability. This is where the mythology of the modern man gets quietly destroyed. Men are raised on the idea that if they work hard, stay loyal, sacrifice for their family, and love her right, they will earn peace, respect, and emotional safety. The script says, "Be the good man, and you will be rewarded." But in the modern relationship marketplace, that script is often a trap. Men discover that loyalty is taken for granted, sacrifice is invisible, and loving her right means accommodating endless demands that never stabilize. The more he gives, the less he is respected. The more he bends, the more he is tested. What makes manipulative exes particularly dangerous is the residue of intimacy. She knows his fears, vulnerabilities, childhood wounds, financial situation, schedule, social circle, and triggers. She knows what he craves: reassurance, appreciation, belonging, physical touch, the feeling of being the one. She can weaponize every bit of that knowledge, consciously or unconsciously. One text, one memory, one carefully timed "I miss you," can hook him back into a cycle he swore he would never return to. The psychological damage often shows up long after the relationship ends. Men find themselves unable to trust their own judgment. They replay arguments, wondering if they were actually the abuser, narcissist, or emotionally unavailable villain she labeled them as. They second-guess every boundary with future partners, terrified of being called controlling or selfish. They over-explain, over-apologize, and over-give, trying to prove they are not the monster their ex painted for them and everyone else. This is not just emotional discomfort, it is an identity crisis. A man who has been slowly dismantled by emotional terrorism often loses his drive. Work performance drops. Sleep is wrecked. Risk-taking disappears. He becomes overly cautious at exactly the time in his life when he needs to be bold. Opportunities pass by because he is too mentally foggy or too consumed by relationship drama. His body starts to keep score. Chronic stress, weight gain or loss, tension, headaches, digestive problems, loss of libido, and a constant sense of exhaustion become normal. Modern culture tends to excuse this when it comes from women by packaging it as empowerment, standards, or not settling. But there is a dark side to that story. A growing number of women are coached by social media and friend groups to view relationships as a one-way service industry, where men exist to make them feel constantly validated, entertained, and emotionally regulated. Anything less is framed as neglect or even abuse. Meanwhile, basic adult capacities like self-regulation, gratitude, patience, and accountability are dismissed as pick-me behavior or doing too much. For men, this creates a no-win scenario. If he refuses to tolerate manipulation, he is branded controlling, cold, or insecure. If he tolerates it, he slowly disintegrates. Many choose disintegration because they have been conditioned to believe that their job is to endure, absorb, apologize, provide, repeat. The tragedy is that what they call being strong is actually self-abandonment, and manipulative exes are masters at targeting that exact weakness. The core problem this analysis is setting up is not women are bad or men are victims by default. The problem is that a specific set of psychological dynamics in modern relationships is systematically destroying men who were never taught how to recognize, name, and defend against them. They walk into emotional ambushes unarmed, believing love is supposed to hurt, that confusion is normal, that constant chaos is just passion. By the time they realize they are being psychologically dismantled, they have already lost years of their life and chunks of their self-respect. This is the pain point. Men are waking up from relationships with manipulative exes feeling like survivors of a war no one will admit happened. There is no ceremony, no recognition, no language for what they went through, just a vague instruction from society to move on and be mature. But moving on is impossible if a man does not understand the mechanisms that broke him down in the first place. Without that understanding, he will walk into the same pattern again, with a different face and a slightly different script. The purpose here is not to teach men how to hate women, but to teach them how to stop participating in their own destruction. That begins with an unflinching look at how modern relationship narratives and manipulative exes can turn love into a slow, methodical demolition of a man's psyche. Only when the problem is clearly seen, named, and understood can any real psychological defense be built. The machinery of psychological destruction in modern relationships is not loud, obvious, or cinematic. It is quiet, repetitive, plausibly deniable, and almost always framed as love concern or just how relationships are. Men do not fall into it because they are stupid. They fall into it because many of the behaviors used against them are socially normalized, even applauded, when women do them. To build a real defense against manipulative exes, men first need to see the weapons clearly, the tactics, the patterns, the subtle moves that turn a relationship into a long-term demolition project. One of the most powerful weapons is devaluation disguised as high standards. At first, he is praised, admired, told he is different, special, a real man. This idealization phase hooks him. Finally, someone sees his effort, his potential, his goodness. Then, slowly, the tone changes. The same traits that were once praised become ammunition. His long work hours become, "You never make time for me." His ambition becomes, "You only care about yourself." His acts of service become bare minimum. And that is just what a man is supposed to do. Nothing he does counts as generosity. It is rebranded as obligation. This creates a psychological double bind. If he gives less, he is a failure. If he gives more, the bar moves, and his new level of effort becomes the new minimum. He is trapped on a treadmill of performance where he is perpetually behind. The point of this is not growth or improvement, it is control. A man who believes he is always slightly failing will work harder and harder while feeling less and less entitled to respect, rest, or negotiation. He becomes easy to guilt trip and easy to manipulate. Another core mechanism is control disguised as concern. It rarely starts with, "You are not allowed to do this." It starts with, "I just worry about you. So she checks his phone because I want to trust you. She wants to know his location because it makes me feel safe. She questions his friends because I do not think they are a good influence. She interrogates his schedule because I miss you." None of these requests sound evil on their own. In fact, many men interpret them as signs of affection and attachment. But the pattern is what matters. Every concession he makes shrinks his private space and expands her surveillance. In time, this becomes what can only be described as placing a GPS tracker on his soul. He begins to self-monitor to avoid conflict. He edits what he says, where he goes, who he talks to, and how long he stays out. The incredible twist is that his compliance does not generate more trust. It generates contempt. The more he submits, the less she respects him. And because she does not respect him, she pushes further. This is how a man is slowly trained to live under emotional occupation while still telling himself he is being a good partner. Emotional manipulation, or emotional terrorism, is another key weapon. Tears during every serious conversation, threats of leaving or self-harm if he sets a boundary, phrases like, "If you really loved me, you would," are not random emotions. They are strategic pressure points. Many men are conditioned from childhood to fix women's feelings, to soothe, to protect, to take responsibility for everyone's emotional atmosphere. A manipulative ex exploits that programming mercilessly. She knows that crying at the right moment can derail his valid point and switch the narrative from "something needs to change" to "how dare you make me feel this way." This is not about occasional emotional overwhelm. Everyone cries. The weaponization happens when negative emotion becomes a lever to control outcomes. If every disagreement ends with him comforting her, apologizing, and making concessions just to stop the emotional storm, he learns a dangerous lesson. Peace only comes when he abandons himself. Over months and years, his nervous system learns to fear her emotions the way a civilian fears air raid sirens. He will do anything to avoid setting them off. That is emotional terrorism. Then there is the moving target problem. Goals, standards, and expectations that never stabilize. One month, the complaint is that he is too distant, too logical, not emotionally available enough. So he opens up, shares his fears, becomes vulnerable. Suddenly, he is too sensitive, weak, not a real man. Another week, the demand is that he work harder, hustle more, be ambitious. When he does, he is scolded for not being present, not doing enough at home, not prioritizing her. He is constantly told he is not enough, but never in a way that lets him actually win. This game is rigged. Structure is not an accident. It is a design that keeps him off balance and focused on earning approval instead of noticing the manipulation. If the criteria for being good enough keep changing, he never reaches psychological, solid ground. He cannot say, "I have done my part," because the definition of his part is always updated after the fact. Over time, this erodes his confidence in his own perception. He stops asking, "Is this fair?" and starts asking, "What is wrong with me that I cannot make her happy?" Another mechanism is skill suppression, undermining his adult capacities so that he becomes more dependent, compliant, or inert. This can look like constant criticism of how he does chores, handles money, makes decisions, or manages conflict. If every initiative he takes is met with, "That is not how you do it, why did you think that was a good idea?" or "You always mess things up," eventually, he stops taking initiative. It feels safer to defer or avoid action altogether. Ironically, this then becomes proof in her narrative that he is incompetent, lazy, or immature. She breaks his confidence, then blames him for being broken. This is how a man gets psychologically demoted from partner to overgrown child. He is no longer a co-leader of the relationship. He is someone to be managed, corrected, and monitored. Meanwhile, she can play the role of the overwhelmed, overburdened adult who has to do everything because he cannot handle it. The cost for him is enormous. Not only does he lose self-respect, but his real adult competencies atrophy from disuse. By the time the relationship ends, he may genuinely feel incapable of basic life decisions without someone else's approval. Strategic isolation is another devastating tactic, especially in the hands of an ex who still has emotional access. It rarely starts as, "You are not allowed to see your friends." It sounds like, "I do not like how they influence you. Your family does not really understand us," or "I just feel excluded when you spend time with them." Over time, he notices that every attempt to maintain a support network leads to conflict, emotional withdrawal, or punishment. The path of least resistance becomes canceling plans, distancing from friends, and avoiding family to keep the peace. The result of this is that she becomes the primary, sometimes the only, voice in his head. Without other perspectives, he has no reality check when she distorts events, rewrites history, or redefines what is normal. When she tells him he is the problem, that all men are like him, that no one else would tolerate him, there is no one left to contradict that narrative. Isolation is not an unfortunate side effect of dysfunction. It is often a deliberate strategy to consolidate psychological power. Modern entitlement narratives amplify all of this. A certain strain of contemporary messaging tells women they deserve everything: constant attention, peak lifestyle, unending romantic intensity, financial security, emotional labor, and perfect communication from a man who never shows fatigue, doubt, or frustration. In this storyline, any shortfall is not life being imperfect. It is a moral failure on the man's part. He is not just human, he is failing her. Failing as a man. Failing the relationship. Meanwhile, basic reciprocal responsibilities on her side are reframed as optional, oppressive, or settling. In such a dynamic, manipulative exes often feel justified in using all the above tactics. From their perspective, they are simply holding him accountable, not lowering standards or protecting their peace. The idea that they might be emotionally terrorizing someone does not register because the culture constantly reassures them they are victims in advance. The man, on the other hand, internalizes the idea that any resistance is cruelty, any boundary is abuse, any self-protection is selfishness. That moral asymmetry is the fuel that keeps the destructive machinery running. For men to develop a psychological defense against manipulative exes, understanding these mechanisms is non-negotiable. These are not random bad moods or personality quirks. They are consistent patterns that aim at one outcome: control. Control over his time, his energy, his wallet, his mind, his future. Once a man can name these behaviors as weapons rather than just how she is, he can begin to see the battlefield clearly. And only on a clearly seen battlefield can he decide to stop playing a rigged game and start building his own rules. The long-term consequences of this kind of psychological warfare do not stop when the relationship status changes from "in a relationship" to "it is complicated" to X. In many cases, the breakup is merely a change in format, not a change in power dynamics. The man walks out of the shared apartment, but he does not walk out of the mental prison. He carries it with him. In his nervous system, in his thought patterns, in the way he interprets new relationships, and in the way he relates to himself. Psychologically, the first casualty is often self-trust. A man who has spent years being told that his perceptions are wrong, his feelings are overreactions, his memories are flawed, and his needs are selfish, eventually loses confidence in his own inner compass. After enough cycles of, "That never happened," "You are imagining things," or "You are crazy, everyone would agree with me," his brain starts to treat her version of reality as more valid than his own. When the relationship ends, that conditioning does not vanish. He keeps second-guessing his memories, his boundaries, his right to even be upset. This internalized self-doubt mutates into a constant mental background noise. He replays old arguments in his head, trying to determine whether he was actually abusive or unreasonable. He tortures himself with questions like, "What if she was right about me? What if I really am emotionally unavailable? What if I am the narcissist?" That confusion becomes fertile soil for depression and anxiety. It is not just sadness over the end of a relationship. It is an existential crisis about who he is and whether his perceptions can be trusted at all. The emotional fallout is just as severe. Men leaving manipulative exes frequently experience a strange blend of guilt, longing, relief, and shame. Guilt because they have been conditioned to feel responsible for her emotions and well-being. Longing because the same person who terrorized them emotionally also gave them some of their most intense highs: affection, validation, sex, a sense of belonging. Shame because they cannot easily explain to others why they stayed so long, why they tolerated so much, and why they still miss someone who hurt them. This cocktail of emotions often leads to what looks like self-sabotage from the outside. He might text her again, agree to meet just to talk, fall back into intimacy, or accept new demands for the sake of peace. On the surface, it looks like weakness. In reality, it is the behavior of someone who is still tangled in a web of trauma bonds. Emotional connections formed not just through love, but through cycles of fear, relief, and intermittent reward. His brain has learned to associate her approval with survival and her disapproval with existential threat. The damage does not stay in his emotions, it bleeds into his career. Chronic stress from emotional terrorism wrecks focus and discipline. When a man spends nights in fights, defending himself against accusations, comforting tears, or bracing for the next explosion, he does not wake up sharp and strategic. He wakes up drained. He starts missing opportunities, postponing ambitious projects, or avoiding professional risks because he simply has no psychological bandwidth left. Work becomes a place to escape to, not a field to conquer. Over time, this chronic distraction and stress lead to real losses. Stalled promotions, neglected skills, failed ventures, or careers never fully pursued. Meanwhile, the manipulative ex may frame his growing underperformance as proof that he is, in fact, the incompetent, unmotivated, or unfocused man she always said he was. The brutal irony is that her behavior helped create the very decline she now uses as ammunition against him, especially during breakups, custody battles, or social smear campaigns. Physically, the body absorbs the cost. Living in a constant state of low-grade fear and hypervigilance is not free. Sleep patterns collapse. He either cannot fall asleep because his mind is racing, or he collapses into exhausted, restless sleep that never feels restorative. Cortisol and adrenaline spike more often than they should. This hormonal chaos contributes to weight gain or loss, digestive issues, headaches, weakened immune function, and fatigue that coffee cannot fix. Libido can crash, not because he is not a man, but because his nervous system is stuck in survival mode, not connection mode. Relationships with others also suffer. Friends he has neglected or cut off during the relationship may not fully understand what happened. Some drift away permanently. Others remain, but the connection feels awkward because he is now a different person. More withdrawn, more suspicious, less open. With family, he may carry hidden resentment if they never saw the signs or did not intervene. Or he may feel embarrassed to admit just how far he let things go. The net effect is that he stands in the wreckage of his life more alone than he has ever felt, unsure who he can trust with the full story. The most devastating consequence is erosion of identity. Before the relationship, he had a sense of who he was, his values, his strengths, his priorities, his vision for his life. During the relationship, those were slowly overwritten by her narratives about him. You are selfish. You are broken. You are lucky I even put up with you. No one else would tolerate you. After years of that, he may emerge unable to answer simple questions. What do you want? What do you stand for? What are your non-negotiables? His life has revolved around managing her emotions for so long that his own desires feel foreign or irrelevant. This identity erosion is why many men coming out of manipulative dynamics feel an almost gravitational pull to jump into another relationship quickly. Not always because they are desperate for love, but because they are terrified of confronting the emptiness inside. Being single means facing the fact that they do not really know themselves anymore. Getting into something new gives them a temporary script to follow. New partner, new role, new distractions. Unfortunately, without understanding what went wrong before, they often reproduce the same pattern in a slightly prettier package. The reality check comes when these men start dating in the modern landscape with even slightly higher standards or boundaries. A man who has been dismantled and rebuilt begins to say quiet, reasonable things like, "No. I do not pay for everything by default. No. I will not cancel my plans last minute because you are bored." Or no. I am not okay with being insulted as a joke. The reaction many encounter is not gratitude for his clarity, but hostility. Suddenly, he is labeled stingy, controlling, emotionally unavailable, insecure, or not a real man. Take something as basic as splitting a bill on a date. A man who no longer wants to play the role of walking wallet might suggest sharing costs or alternating. In a healthy dynamic, this is a simple conversation. In an entitlement-inflated environment, some women interpret this as an attack on their value. They might shame him, test him, or ghost him. The implicit message, your boundaries make you less desirable. For a man already recovering from years of being told his needs do not matter, this feels like proof that the world punishes him whenever he tries to protect himself. The same pattern appears when he enforces time boundaries. If he says he is not available 24/7 for texting, late-night venting, or last-minute plans because he prioritizes sleep, work, or the gym, some potential partners treat this as neglect. If you really liked me, you would make time. Translation: if you were serious, you would abandon your structure and put my feelings at the center of your life. For a man rebuilding his sense of self, choosing to maintain his schedule in the face of that guilt is incredibly hard. But without that reality check, he slides straight back into self-erasure. What becomes clear is that many modern relationship interactions are rigged against male self-preservation. The moment a man insists on reciprocity, respect, and mutual responsibility, he often collides with the entitlement storylines his ex embodied but did not invent. The culture around him reinforces her message. You are supposed to endlessly give, absorb, and perform. If you stop, you are the problem. This makes recovery not just a private psychological project, but a countercultural act. And yet, seeing this clearly can be liberating. When a man recognizes that his confusion, exhaustion, and loss of identity are not random personal failures but predictable outcomes of systematic emotional manipulation, something shifts. He stops asking, "What is wrong with me?" and starts asking, "What was done to me?" That question does not erase responsibility for his choices, but it restores a crucial piece of power: the ability to interpret his past accurately. From there, he can begin to rebuild not just his life, but his internal standards for what he will and will not allow again. The turning point for any man coming out of a manipulative dynamic is brutal in its simplicity. Stop participating in your own destruction. That sounds obvious from the outside, but on the inside, it means unlearning a lifetime of programming. It means refusing roles that once felt like proof of being a good man: the fixer, the emotional shock absorber, the endless provider, when those roles only ever got you drained and disrespected. It means accepting that many people, including exes and even new partners, will see your boundaries as an attack, not as a declaration of self-respect. The first piece of psychological defense is non-participation. You do not win a rigged game by playing it better. You win by stepping away from the table. With an ex, this often means radical reduction of access. No late-night therapy calls. No casual hookups. No just checking in texts. No emotional debriefs about her new relationships. If there are kids involved, contact becomes strictly functional and documented, focused only on logistics. Every time you feed her access to your emotions, attention, and time, you supply the fuel that keeps the old power dynamic alive. Cutting that off is not cruelty, it is survival. Non-participation also applies to arguments. Manipulative exes are experts at baiting men into endless debates, where the goal is not resolution, but exhaustion and self-doubt. The defense here is learning to disengage from conversations that go in circles, rewrite history, or attack your character. You state your position once, clearly and calmly, then step back. You stop explaining yourself to someone who has no interest in understanding you. You stop trying to win in a court where the judge, jury, and rules are all controlled by the other person. Silence, distance, and brevity become strategic tools. The second line of defense is building non-negotiable boundaries. Most men know what they do not like, but they have never translated that into clear, enforceable lines. A non-negotiable is not a preference. It is a line that, if crossed, ends access. Not threatened access, not lectured access, but actual access. Lying, emotional blackmail, financial manipulation, insults during conflict, threats of self-harm to control you, attempts to isolate you from friends or family, smear campaigns against your character. These are not issues to work through. They are disqualifiers. To make this real, a man has to decide in advance what happens when a boundary is broken. If she insults you, the conversation ends and contact pauses. If she lies, trust is withdrawn and her claims are independently verified. If she uses tears as a weapon, you do not rush to soothe. You pause the interaction until both of you are calm. If she threatens to harm herself to keep you from leaving, you call emergency services or a trusted third party, and you still leave. The message to your own nervous system is clear. My life is not negotiable collateral in someone else's drama. A third element is accepting the role of the bad guy in other people's stories. Manipulative exes rarely let go gracefully. When you stop playing your old role, you will be framed as selfish, cruel, uncaring, abusive, or not a real man to mutual friends, family, and sometimes even to your own children. The instinct to counter every lie, correct every narrative, and convince everyone of the truth is strong. That instinct, if followed, keeps you entangled. Real psychological freedom requires tolerating being misunderstood. You choose peace of mind over reputation in the eyes of people who will never see the full picture anyway. This also applies to dating. When you begin to enforce standards, splitting costs, protecting your schedule, refusing emotional dumping from strangers, walking away from disrespect, some women will brand you cheap, cold, or damaged. You cannot let those labels push you back into compliance. If a basic boundary disqualifies you in her eyes, that is not a loss, it is early protection. Your job is not to contort yourself into what the loudest voices online say a man should be. Your job is to build a life that aligns with your own values and invite only those who respect that into it. Another critical part of defense is rebuilding your identity from the inside out. Manipulative dynamics hollow men out, leaving them defined by someone else's opinions. Recovery means actively reconstructing who you are without reference to your ex's evaluations. This can be as simple and as hard as sitting with a notebook and answering questions. What kind of man do you respect? What kind of work lights you up? What friendships make you feel alive? What principles are worth losing people over? If you do not answer those questions consciously, the world will answer them for you, and you will end up back in familiar patterns. From there, you deliberately rebuild your life structure. You protect your sleep, time alone, training, and work as core pillars, not optional extras. You reconnect with friends and family who actually care about you, even if those conversations are awkward at first. You pursue hobbies and skills that have nothing to do with attracting a partner or proving anything to anyone. The point is to anchor your self-worth in actions and commitments you control, not in the unreliable weather of someone else's attention. Strategically, you also create external safeguards. You document important interactions with an ex, especially around money, custody, or legal issues. You do not make major decisions in isolation. You run them by trusted, rational people who are not entangled in the drama. You get professional help if you can. Therapy, coaching, support groups. Not because you are broken, but because you are unlearning relational patterns that were installed over years. Having neutral witnesses to your story helps counter the internalized gaslighting that says, maybe it was all my fault. A deeper layer of defense is changing how you respond to female emotion in general. Emotional intensity from women has likely been your trigger point. You rush to fix, to calm, to prove you are safe. That reflex is exactly what manipulators exploit. The upgrade is this: you can care about someone's feelings without making them your responsibility. You can stay calm in the presence of anger, tears, or disappointment without collapsing your boundaries. You can say, I see that you are upset, but I will not be spoken to like that, and then follow through on the consequence. The final and most important decision is to choose freedom and inner peace over familiar dysfunction. Chaos has a strange comfort when you grew up in it or spent years immersed in it. Boring, stable, respectful relationships can feel off compared to the adrenaline highs and lows of manipulation. You have to consciously retrain your brain to value the quiet, to trust the steady, to choose the partner who does not constantly trigger survival mode. Freedom is not just the absence of your ex, it is the absence of the internal compulsion that pulled you toward people like her. In the end, psychological defense against manipulative exes is not a set of tricks. It is an identity shift. You stop seeing yourself as a man whose worth is proven by how much chaos he can absorb and how much pain he can tolerate. You start seeing yourself as a man whose worth is reflected in the standards he holds, the boundaries he keeps, the life he builds, and the peace he refuses to sacrifice. When that identity is locked in, manipulative people still exist, but their power over you ends.